So we're here today with our entire recruiting team here at TurningPoint Executive Search. I've got Danielle Mathis, who is our practice director, been on board, actually be 6 years come next month in August. And Raquel Gallant is here as well, and she is our recruiting manager. She's been on board for 1.5 years. And we're going to talk a lot about what's happening out there in the recruiting world. It certainly has changed quite a bit over the last 6 months since COVID has hit. And things have changed a bit in terms of both the client side and kind of what clients are kind of comfortable with, but also on the candidate side and kind of what their receptivity is, to being recruited and changing jobs. So should be a good conversation here. So Danielle, why don't you start? I know that you've done some work for some large organizations such as Kia Motors and recently with Alteryx as well up in Orange County, a big data analytics company. What are you seeing out there in terms of the changes in recruiting tactics?
That's a good question, Ken. I think the thing that has been the most impressive is just how quickly everyone has pivoted, both candidates from their perspective in terms of interviewing process, and then also on the client side, whether that's onboarding or how we're going about search, or maybe opening something up that once was originally an in-office to a relocation. Relocation to an in-office or remote. So I think that's been the most impressive, but I am seeing a little trepidation in the marketplace just due to uncertainty.
Yeah, very much so. I know you had a client that's actually been trying to figure out how to, find somebody for a very specialized position, ideally based in Orange County, but a lot of the candidates themselves are in other parts of the country. And it can be tough for a candidate to say, yes, I'll make a job change, but I don't want to relocate. And at the same time, the company says, yeah, we want this great candidate, but we need the person to be here for various reasons. It's tough to kind of find that balance. And Raquel, I know you finished a search recently also for a financial services firm down here in San Diego for operations director position, and ended up bringing somebody down from LA. Maybe you can talk about kind of that experience as well.
Yeah, so that was a relocation, obviously, through the pandemic, which was an interesting situation to navigate. And what I'm kind of seeing out there is, it's all in the candidate's comfort level, and what kind of opportunity it is and how it aligns with their future goals. So, this candidate in particular relocated from LA to San Diego. What we put in there was that he would have an extra month to do so, being that, looking for new housing and apartments, things of that nature. It's going to be a little bit different right now. People aren't doing showings. You're having to navigate all of that virtually. So just making sure that the employer and employee are on the same page for timeline, but still ensuring that there is a timeline so that the relocation actually happens.
And I think for that search also specifically, the candidate never met the client or our client until the very, very end, right? And that was kind of if I remember correctly,
Right.
kind of a in the office space, but at opposite ends of the conference table, having a kind of social distancing final interview. Is that right?
Yeah, I would say 90% of the interview process was virtual, and it was just the final meeting. There was no one in office except the company owner and the candidate. They sat, like you said, on opposite ends of the table, abiding by social distancing. And that was more so, that was centered around their comfort level, how the candidate felt, and also how the employee felt. After that search, I have since placed a CEO with a manufacturing company in Orange County, and that hire was 100% virtual. So we are seeing a transition from in-person hiring and candidate screening to completely hiring virtually, which is pretty interesting and new for the industry.
Yeah, I remember that our for that CEO search that we did, the private equity firm that owned the company was saying that he was the chairman of the firm, saying this is the first time in his 40 plus years of experience that he's ever hired a CEO kind of sight unseen, at least face to face sight unseen. It was all virtual,
Right.
so that was kind of a first for everybody. And I know there's things that I've read about, but also things that we've experienced as a firm where companies have tried to be a little creative in terms of interviews. Also, I think Danielle, you had a situation where a client had even talked about doing some kind of a walking at the beach kind of interview, right?
Yes. So it's been interesting. I have actually talked to other folks in the industry, and they're also experiencing obviously the same things. And so some creative things like walking through the office virtually, having somebody internally from the organization actually physically walk the space so they could understand maybe how that translates into company culture, or having them talk to various team members about company culture, specifically hosting a happy hour type of event. I also did have a final round interview as a walk and talk, where the candidate and the client both brought coffee, and they walked at a social distancing manner down the beach and had a great chat, and that ended in a hire. So, those different creative ways, both from I've even had candidates come to me and say, hey, I thought of this creative idea. I don't know if they're interested in it. So that way everybody can feel pretty amenable about, the next steps.
That's great. Yeah. Well, I think certainly kind of creativity and just kind of the willingness on both sides, both candidates and companies, to do things differently than what they've done for decades and in some cases a century, right? That the whole interviewing process and hiring process has got to change. And same with onboarding. Once they actually get on board and they get hired, that's going to be different too, because they're not stepping into an actual office day one. They may be virtual during the interview process, and their first month or couple months can also be virtual. So that's going to be a bit of a challenge too. It's interesting. Yeah.
And I think from a candidate perspective, they're trying to figure out how to interview in a different environment as well, dogs barking or kids playing, or the various things, and clients are having to also show some empathy from that perspective too. And so that's been awesome to see all the way around.
Right, exactly. And who would have known you get a chance to see into the house of your future boss, right? You can see what's happening behind them. Maybe you see their dog walk by in the background. Who knows? So in terms of what we're seeing out there, I know 6 months ago, because it was a very strong candidate market, that a lot of candidates were focused very heavily on compensation. That was one of the big driving factors, as well as upper mobility. But now with the pandemic in place, and it could be this way for another 6-12 months, who knows? I'm curious, are there any changes that you're seeing out there in terms of candidate priorities and how they're deciding whether or not to pursue an opportunity?
Yeah, I think in my personal experience for candidates, they're taking a deeper look at their long-term goals and seeing where their current employment or future employment is in alignment with those future opportunities. It's, compensation is important, location is important, but I think the whole pandemic has given candidates a sense of just reality and how quickly life can change. And is this what I want to be doing for the long haul? And is it going to get me to where I want to be? I've had a lot of interesting conversations with candidates that are actively seeking opportunities and that have just said, since this whole pandemic hit, I've either seen what I wanted out of my company, or I haven't seen what I wanted in terms of their response or willingness to flex and work with employees. So I think that's a thing on everyone's mind right now.
I think that's a great point. And I think the only other thing I would add to that is I'm seeing much more of the conversation be less about compensation or less about title and more about flexibility. I think that was something that maybe wasn't necessarily a priority, but now due to kind of unexpected circumstances, that may be, a deal breaker in some cases. Yeah,
exactly. Well, I mean, all the surveys I've been reading out there and different articles over the last several months, it's anywhere from 25 to 70%, of employers say they're going to allow their employees to work from home kind of indefinitely. Right? It depends a lot on the job. Certainly, roles where you're managing a good-sized team, or if it's a turnaround situation, or if you're in a very hands-on labor-intensive role, obviously you can't do that from home. But for a lot of the other roles out there, especially where we focus, when it's a head of marketing, head of sales type position, or even operations type roles, there's at least a component of that role that can be done from home. So what about in terms of what you're seeing out there on the client side, and in terms of process? Are you seeing things slow down, speed up? Are there more kind of cooks in the kitchen, as we say, right? Are there more stakeholders involved in making that final hiring decision versus what you saw 6 or 12 months ago?
I think that's an important question to ask, because right now we are seeing everybody be a lot more methodical all the way around. And so I think things are moving a little more slowly because there's a lot of things happening at once. So they're having to kind of think through this problem first and this problem second and this problem third, and maybe hiring isn't necessarily at the top of the list because they didn't expect all of these other things to be happening simultaneously. So from our end, being patient and just being empathetic to our clients and thinking through it from their perspective, that they have so much on their plate. So definitely I would say that things are taking a little bit longer than usual. And I think they are having maybe a few more conversations in terms of additional interviews needed. And I think that's for the fact that they aren't able to see them in person, and they do want to make sure everybody feels a little bit more comfortable than usual, so to speak, than maybe before. And I think also the pace of the market before was rapid fire. And that was simply because the demand was there from the client side, and there weren't as many candidates accessible. And now I think there's a little bit more play there, if you will.
Yeah, and I think the one sense of optimism candidates can have during these difficult times is that because so many companies are shifting to hiring virtually, yes, they may be more methodical in their decision, but in terms of actually scheduling of the interviews, senior executives aren't traveling as much, and so once you kind of get your foot in the door, things can move a little bit quicker, just due to the nature of things not having to be in person or navigate crazy busy travel schedules, both on the candidate or client side. Could be either.
Yeah, that's great. No, I agree completely. And I think there's, everybody, it comes down to the fact that everybody has to rethink everything, right? I mean, the operative word out there is fluid and flexible. I mean, you have to be those two things right now, whether you're a candidate looking for work or either actively or passively. And companies as well have to realize that, it takes a little bit more courting right now of candidates, because a lot of candidates are a little bit less receptive, a little more risk, averse right now because of what's happening. And so there has to be some courting that goes on by the client, by the company side, to make sure the candidate really feels welcome, because you're not able to create that rapport or trust or kind of warm and fuzzy feeling face to face. It's all done virtually, which is much more difficult to actually accomplish. So definitely. All right, great. Well, thank you for sharing your insights today. Hopefully this will be helpful to a lot of our clients and candidates out there as well. And as always, we're happy to be a resource and a sounding board. So feel free to reach out. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.